Hello, AP Psychology. Welcome to your very first flipped video of the year. So as we go through this process, this will maybe seem a little bit strange and something that you're not used to quite yet for the first couple of videos, but trust me, you're gonna get the hang of all of this, as will I. So this is a new setup and a new format for me this year, but I'm really excited about it, especially given the current situation that we're all in. I think this is going to be a great learning opportunity for all of us, and the end result will hopefully provide you with some great AP test scores. Woo. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. You want to be sure that you have your guided notes nearby, and as you go through these videos, you want to make any point, if you have questions along the way, write those down. That's the great part of this. If you didn't hear something or you're confused about something, hit stop and rewind it and go back. And so that's the beauty of these flipped videos. So we are going to start the year by looking at the scientific foundations of psychology. Where did this all start? What is psychology? What does it look like? Because this will provide the basis for us as we continue to look at psychology during the rest of the year. We'll want to know what these different perspectives are. We need to understand where it all began and what those core ideas are about psychology. So for this unit, there are some key targets that College Board wants you to know and understand. We're going to look at how psychology is actually a philosophical and a physiological study. There are many different approaches that describe human behavior, and you need to understand the different domains of psychology. What are the different ways that psychology is used outside of the classroom where we are learning about the subject matter. So let's start with the basics. So psychology, when you break it down, the root words of psychology, psyche means the soul, and ology means the study of. So psychology is the study of the soul, and the word soul to me it's a word that has a lot of meaning. And you think of your soul, and that's sort of the storage place of all of your emotions and your experiences and all of those feelings. And the study of the soul. And what an amazing thing it is. And psychology is going to be a class that is going to be relevant to you on so many levels. That's the great thing about this class. And I continue to learn every single year when I teach this class. It's a constantly evolving study, and your soul is constantly evolving as well as you get older, as you have more experiences, good and bad. So psychology is, in the root sense of it, the study of the soul. So when we look at a more definitive explanation of psychology, it is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. So in science, you make verifiable and objective predictions. That's what science is. Guess what? Psychology wouldn't know anything about behavior and mental processes if they didn't do scientific studies, making verifiable and objective predictions. And since we're doing all of that while talking about behavior, we have to look at psychology as a study of the observable acts. How do people behave? What do they do? And then it's also the mental processes. The storing, recalling, and using information and feelings. You put all of these things together, and that is what psychology is. So something that gets asked quite often is, number one, is it really a science? We'll talk about that later. But yes, it is indeed a science, and every teacher and professor has their own opinions about what constitutes real science. But yes, psychology is a science, but it is a social science, and it is different from other social sciences in that it focuses on individual behavior, whereas things like sociology, or even American government, a social science class. It's looking at, the behavior of different groups. And the study of psychology had its roots in philosophy as well as physiology. You can't understand the human mind if you don't understand how the brain works, and that makes it physiology. And this is an old study. It's been around for a long time. They just didn't call it psychology. But the real birth of psychology, you could say, was around 1879. So we're going to take a look now at some of these early belief systems about psychology and where did it all start. So this comparison of nature versus nurture, and this is a topic that will come through a lot this year as we study human behavior. Let's take a look and start with the idea of nature. So there were these philosophers that you may have heard of named Plato and Socrates, and their belief was that we are born the way we are. We are what we are. That our genetics and our hormones are what determine our behavior. And what it comes down to is our biology. And that is the nature point of view. Nurture, on the other hand, the philosopher Aristotle subscribed to the perspective and the beliefs about nurture. And nurture has to do with the idea that environmental factors explain our behavior and that we are raised a certain way, and that will help determine what our behavior is. Our experience will determine our behavior. We are nurtured a certain way, and therefore we will behave a certain way. So that's the comparison of beliefs in terms of psychology and how we are the way we are. So those philosophers, that was a long, long time ago. And then we have this thing called the Renaissance. And all of a sudden, psychology kind of went quiet because religion and religious beliefs were in control of the thinking and perspectives of all of this. But then all of a sudden, the Renaissance happened, and you start to see these new ideas about behavior come to the forefront. And one of those individuals, his name was Rene Descartes. And what it comes down to for Descartes is that our heredity provides individuals with inborn knowledge and abilities. We are born knowing things, and that would be more of the nature point of view. And that we are to doubt everything, and that's the only way that we can be certain about anything. I think, therefore I am. And these are the points of view and the ideas of Rene Descartes. Another important founder of the beginnings of psychology is a man named John Locke, that you may be familiar with from your studies of American government and U.S. history. But Locke saw the mind as receptive and passive, with its main goal as sensing and perceiving. So our nature, our genes, our DNA doesn't determine our behavior. It's based on what we learn. And this idea that we are born as a blank slate. And this is definitely part of the nurture point of view. And this is something that we call empiricism, that everything we know is learned. Let's get down to the official beginning of what we know as modern psychology. And we need to mention this gentleman here. His name is Wilhelm Wundt. and he is a German professor at the University of Leipzig in Germany, and his focus was on what we call the consciousness, and that he would find these basic elements in our conscious processing, and then that would help us to discover how those sensations and feelings might be connected. So what it came down to was, what is the structure of what's going on in the mind? What are those elements? What are those pieces? So Wilhelm Wundt is known as the father of psychology, and he had what we call a structuralist point of view. He would be classified as a structuralist. So in structuralism, there is a lot of work on sensation and perception. So sensation would be, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you taste? What do you touch? Those are your sensations. And then your perception is how you interpret all of those sensations. So if you break those down into the minute detail, that becomes the structure, aka structuralism and Wilhelm Wundt. There was a lot of focus on self-observation and seeing these mental processes in the immediate experience and understanding the structural elements of the mind. And what this would require of individuals was some introspection, and that in order to understand the structural elements of the mind, you had to be able to go inside of yourself, contemplate, think, introspection. And this idea is attributed to a student of Wundt by the name of Tishner. So again, these are all the ideas of structuralism. The other point of view is what we call functionalism. And the big name that you want to connect to functionalism is a man by the name of William James. And he actually is the author of the first American psychology textbook, which may seem sort of like a Jeopardy trivia question kind of answer. But for whatever reason, this is kind of a little fun fact that College Board likes to throw into their multiple choice tests from time to time. So William James wrote the first psychology textbook. He believed, and the functionalists believed, that it is your consciousness is a personal and selective, constantly changing idea. You can't just break it up into pieces for analysis. And William James and the functionalists actually believe that it was kind of foolish to search for these common elements in all of our minds, because we are all individuals with different perspectives. And you could also connect Darwin's theory of natural selection to functionalism as well. What was the purpose of our thinking? Why do we go through these processes? And obviously the purpose of our thinking, there's going to be some evolutionary change with all of this as well. So those two ideas can also connect together. So let's look at them side by side so that you can kind of see the key differences and understand them a little bit better. So functionalism and William James. William James, if we look at this in terms of the idea of salt, the functionalists would look at what are the possible uses for salt. Well, we use it to preserve food. Salt makes our food taste better. That's the function of salt. A structuralist like Tishner or Wundt would want to know what the parts of salt are. What are the components? Okay, and that would also be similar to the experience of salt. You know, what made it what it is? How did it become that? So structuralism and functionalism, one of the earliest ways to look at and consider psychology. So let's keep going here with another early school of thought, and that's what we call Gestalt psychology. And Gestalt can be looked at as the whole experience. And in Gestalt psychology, you're looking at the whole experience because things can't just be broken down into these little elements. It's the whole versus multiple individual elements. And looking at this picture here, this image, This is an example of Gestalt psychology because initially when you glance at it, you see this image of a man, but then you look a little closer, and you start to see some of these small elements. But the big picture is it's the face of the man. A little bit closer, you see some grapes and fruit and different things from nature that actually make up that face. So as we go through this, let's make note of some of the other important individuals in the history of psychology early on. And there are a few women that we need to include in this list of important people. The first one is Mary Whiton Calkins, and she actually studied with William James, who wrote the first textbook, at Harvard. But because she was a woman, they did not give her a degree. She would go on to become the first female president of the APA, which is the American Psychological Association. This next woman, who, you know what, she looks an awful lot like Mary Whiton Calkins. Oops, didn't fix that picture for you guys. But her name is Margaret Washburn, and she earned the first PhD in psychology. And she did this with her studies of animals. And she also would become an early president of the American Psychological Association, which was founded in 1892. And their overall goal is to advance the study of psychology to help benefit and improve people's lives. We will swing around to the APA as we study ethics in just a little bit this year and what their code of ethics is in terms of experimentation. Some of you also, when you go away to college, you're going to have to follow what they call the APA format. That MLA idea anymore doesn't exist at a lot of colleges. So on this pie chart here, this nice, bright, colorful pie chart, you can see some of the different types of psychological study. So psychology is made up of the study of the biology of psychology, developmental psychology, cognitive psychology. There's a lot of different subfields within psychology, and we will, as we study the course, as we go through the course this year, we will focus on some of these different subfields. And then in terms of the types of industries and how psychology is used, the majority of people that are working with a psychology degree, most people will go into what's called clinical psychology, which we'll define here in a second. Followed, kind of dragging behind there, we've got the subfields of counseling, education, and industry, and then some other smaller subfields of psychology. So as we look at those subfields so that you can categorically understand the difference between them, the first one is a clinical psychologist. And a clinical psychologist is going to study, assess, and treat people with disorders. You sort of can think of a clinic as being like a hospital. And if you go to a hospital, you have a problem and you're going to seek treatment. So a clinical psychologist will study, assess, and treat people with a disorder. Someone who goes into counseling, they are going to be trained, and their role is to help people cope with challenges. An educational psychologist will help individuals in school settings. Every school has a school psychologist, and they help with individuals who maybe have some learning challenges and they need to get tested, they need to get placed in the right classes. And then the last subfield is the industrial and organizational psychologist. And that would be something you would find them more in a workplace, and usually a bigger company. And they're looking at the behavior of individuals in the workplace. So if you were to get a job as a psychologist, most likely you would be working in some sort of academic institution, probably doing some research a private practice or in a hospital or clinic. And then it's followed by some of the other places that psychologists work. But primarily higher education settings and in hospitals and private practices. That's where psychologists are going to get a job. And we'll be touching on careers in psychology throughout the year, and we'll actually have an opportunity for some professionals in the field of psychology to come in, drop in, and spend a few minutes with us talking about their work and how they got to be where they are, because this is an incredibly popular field, and my guess is there's a few of you who might be interested in doing work in psychiatry or psychology as a major in college. So there's a couple words that get thrown around there that people tend to mix up, and there's a very important difference between these two words. So that's the word of psychology or psychiatry. So a clinical psychologist will study, assess, and treat troubled people in therapy. A psychiatrist, on the other hand, they are medical doctors. They have gone to med school and they treat people who have some really serious issues that would require hospitalization or some type of drug therapy. So be sure that you understand the difference between a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and a psychiatrist. All right, so we are at the end of this first flip video, and we've gone through most of these College Board targets. We've looked at the different early perspectives of psychology, and you've been introduced to some of the theoretical, or introduced to some of the domains of psychology. So what's left are the different approaches, and we'll pick that up in our second flipped video. And so now the next thing you want to do is find your quiz that corresponds to this video and see how you do. What did you learn in this first flip video? So I'll see you next time. Bye.